The text message arrived at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday night. 3 simple words that shattered everything I thought I knew about the 2 people I trusted most in the world. We're together now. My name is Jessica, I'm 26 years old, and my own sister decided that my relationship of 3 years was something she could just take for herself. What she didn't know was that Marcus had been hiding something from both of us, something that would make her victory taste like ash in her mouth. If you've ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to have your back, stay with me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I should probably start by explaining how I ended up staring at that message in my tiny studio apartment in downtown Portland, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. The story really begins 2 years earlier when I first brought Marcus home to meet my family during Thanksgiving dinner. I was 24 then, working as a graphic designer for a small marketing firm, and finally feeling like my life was coming together after years of struggling to find my place in the world. Marcus Chen was everything I had never dared to hope for in a partner. We met at a coffee shop near my office where he was working on his laptop, surrounded by architectural drawings and engineering textbooks. He had this quiet confidence about him that drew me in immediately. When I accidentally spilled my latte all over his blueprints, I was mortified, but he just laughed and said it gave his building designs character. That first conversation lasted 4 hours, and by the time we reluctantly parted ways, I knew I had met someone special. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally. Marcus was completing his master's degree in structural engineering, while working part-time at a construction firm. He was methodical about everything, the kind of person who measured twice and cut once, who planned every detail of our dates down to backup restaurants in case our first choice was full. This careful nature extended to how he approached our relationship. He took time to really know me, asking thoughtful questions about my dreams, my fears, my family, my past relationships that had left me cautious about opening my heart again. What I loved most about Marcus was how he saw me. With previous boyfriends, I had always felt like I was performing some version of myself, trying to be funnier, more outgoing, more agreeable than I naturally was. But with Marcus, I could just exist. He appreciated my dry sense of humor, the way I got absorbed in creative projects for hours, my tendency to observe people and situations before jumping in. He made me feel like being myself was not just acceptable, but actually attractive. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, we had been together for 8 months, and I was ready to introduce him to my family. I had told him stories about growing up in the small town of Bend, Oregon, about my parents who ran a successful real estate agency, and especially about my younger sister Chloe, who was finishing her senior year of college and had always been the golden child of our family. Chloe was 2 years younger than me, but had always seemed decades more confident and self-assured. Where I was cautious and thoughtful, she was spontaneous and bold. Where I preferred small gatherings with close friends, she thrived at parties with dozens of people. Growing up, our differences had been manageable, even complimentary at times. But as we got older, especially during high school, those differences started to feel more like a competition that I was consistently losing. Our parents, David and Susan Harper, never explicitly compared us, but their reactions spoke volumes. When Chloe came home with stories of social successes, leadership roles, or romantic adventures, they would lean in with engaged smiles and follow-up questions. When I shared my own accomplishments, quieter victories like winning a design competition, or getting published in the school literary magazine, they would offer supportive but brief acknowledgments before the conversation moved on to more exciting topics. This pattern continued into college. Chloe chose a large state university 3 hours away, where she majored in communications and joined a sorority. Her Instagram was a constant stream of parties, formals, spring break trips, and group photos with beautiful friends. Meanwhile, I attended a smaller liberal arts college closer to home, focusing on my art and design studies, while maintaining a small circle of close friends who shared my interests in independent films and used bookstores. Despite these differences, or maybe because of them, I genuinely loved my sister. During our childhood, she had been my built-in best friend and adventure companion. She had this infectious enthusiasm that could pull me out of my shell and convince me to try things I would never have attempted on my own. Some of my happiest memories involved Chloe talking me into midnight raids on the kitchen for ice cream, or convincing me to sneak out and go stargazing in the back field behind our house. But as we grew older, there were moments when her influence felt less benevolent. In high school, she had a tendency to absorb attention wherever she went, sometimes leaving me feeling invisible even in my own family. There was the time she convinced me to ask my crush to the school dance, then spent the entire evening charming him until he was completely focused on her instead of me. Or when she borrowed my favorite dress for a party without asking, then returned it with a stain that never came out. These incidents were always followed by apologies and explanations about how she had not meant any harm, how she had just gotten carried away in the moment. By the time I was bringing Marcus home for Thanksgiving, Chloe and I had settled into a comfortable adult relationship. She was in her final year at Oregon State, studying communications and already landing internships with marketing firms in Portland. Our conversations had become easier, focused on our respective careers and futures rather than the social dynamics that had complicated our teenage years. I was genuinely excited for her to meet Marcus, hoping that my relationship would show her that I had found my own path to happiness, one that suited my personality perfectly. The Thanksgiving visit started exactly as I had hoped. Marcus charmed my parents with his polite manners and thoughtful questions about their business. He complimented my mother's cooking with specific details that showed he was actually paying attention, not just offering generic praise. He engaged my father in a lengthy discussion about local construction projects and the challenges of building in Oregon's varied climate conditions. Watching him navigate my family dynamics with such ease made my heart swell with pride and love. Chloe arrived home from college on Wednesday evening, breezing through the front door with her usual energy and immediately filling the house with chatter about her classes, her sorority activities, and her plans for winter break. She greeted Marcus with her characteristic warmth, asking him about his studies and his work with genuine seeming interest. At dinner that first night, she entertained everyone with stories about her professors and classmates, her animated gestures and infectious laughter making even mundane campus experiences sound like adventures. I watched Marcus during these conversations, noting how he smiled at Chloe's stories and asked follow-up questions that encouraged her to elaborate. This seemed natural and appropriate. My sister was charming, and it made sense that my boyfriend would appreciate her humor and energy. What I failed to recognize at the time were the subtle signs that his interest went beyond polite engagement. There was the way his attention seemed to sharpen when Chloe entered a room, how his eyes would track her movements even when she was not the one speaking. During dinner conversations, he would direct questions specifically to her, building on her comments in ways that kept her at the center of attention. When she laughed at something he said, he would repeat similar jokes, clearly pleased by her response. On Thursday morning, while I was helping my mother prepare the Thanksgiving meal, Marcus offered to drive Chloe to the store to pick up last-minute items we had forgotten. I thought nothing of it at the time. It seemed like a helpful gesture from a boyfriend trying to integrate himself into my family. They returned an hour later with everything on the list, both of them laughing about some story Chloe had told during the drive. Again, this seemed perfectly normal. My sister was funny, and Marcus appreciated humor. If anything, I felt pleased that they were getting along so well. The Thanksgiving dinner itself was a success by every measure I cared about. My parents clearly adored Marcus, praising his thoughtfulness and intelligence long after he had gone to bed. My extended family, including my aunt and uncle who joined us for dessert, were equally impressed. My cousin Sarah even pulled me aside to tell me how lucky I was to have found someone so perfect for me. As we cleaned up that evening, I felt a deep contentment about the weekend and about my relationship in general. Friday morning brought more subtle interactions that I would later recognize as warning signs. Marcus and Chloe both seemed to wake up earlier than the rest of us, and I found them in the kitchen together when I came down for coffee. They were engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation that ended abruptly when I appeared. Chloe immediately switched to asking about my plans for the day, while Marcus busied himself with making breakfast for everyone. Later, when we all went for a family hike in the nearby state park, I noticed that Marcus and Chloe often walked together, their conversation animated and private enough that I could not follow it from my position with my parents. That afternoon, while I was taking a nap before our planned evening of board games, I woke to find Marcus and Chloe missing from the house. My parents informed me they had gone for a walk around the neighborhood to look at the fall foliage. They returned as the sun was setting, both of them glowing with exercise and fresh air, talking enthusiastically about the beautiful houses they had seen and the conversations they had shared with neighbors they had encountered. Saturday brought our departure back to Portland, and I felt satisfied with how well the weekend had gone. Marcus had been warmly welcomed into my family, and everyone seemed to genuinely like him. Chloe had been her usual charming self, and I felt proud of both my relationship and my family. The 2-hour drive back to the city was comfortable, with Marcus asking thoughtful questions about my childhood and sharing his own reflections on meeting my family for the first time. Over the following months, our relationship continued to deepen and grow stronger. Marcus finished his master's degree that spring and landed a position with a prestigious engineering firm in Portland. We began talking more seriously about our future together, discussing everything from career goals to travel plans to the possibility of eventually getting married and starting a family. These conversations felt natural and exciting, built on a foundation of genuine compatibility and shared values. During this period, Chloe finished her senior year at Oregon State and began the process of job hunting. She visited Portland several times that spring, ostensibly to interview with marketing and communications firms in the city. During these visits, she would stay with me in my studio apartment, sleeping on an air mattress in my living room, and filling my small space with her clothes, beauty products, and endless energy. Marcus was always gracious about these visits, often joining us for dinners or activities around the city. He would offer to show Chloe different neighborhoods, recommend restaurants for her interviews, and share his knowledge of Portland as someone who had lived there longer than either of us. These interactions seemed helpful and brotherly, exactly the kind of support I would want my boyfriend to offer my sister. What I failed to notice were the private conversations that increasingly occurred between them. Text messages that Marcus would quickly put away when I entered the room. Phone calls he would take in another room, claiming they were work-related even when they occurred during evening hours or weekends. The way Chloe would sometimes seem distracted during our sister time together, checking her phone frequently, and smiling at messages she did not share with me. The first concrete sign that something was wrong came in early summer when Chloe announced she had accepted a position with a marketing firm in Portland and would be moving to the city permanently. This news thrilled me because it meant we would be living in the same place for the first time since high school. I immediately began helping her search for apartments, forwarding listings that fit her budget, and offering to help her move when the time came. Marcus seemed equally excited about Chloe's move, offering to help with apartment hunting and volunteering his truck for moving day. He had insights about different neighborhoods that I lacked, having lived in Portland for several years while completing his degree. His advice about commute times, local amenities, and building quality seemed genuinely helpful, and I appreciated how willing he was to assist my sister with this major life transition. Chloe eventually found a one-bedroom apartment in the Pearl District, a trendy area with easy access to downtown where her new job was located. The apartment was small but stylish, with large windows and modern finishes that perfectly suited her aesthetic preferences. Marcus and I spent a Saturday helping her move, along with a few friends she had made during her job interviews. The day was exhausting but fun, filled with pizza, beer, and the satisfaction of helping someone I loved start an exciting new chapter of her life. Once Chloe was settled in Portland, our relationships naturally evolved to accommodate the new geography. Instead of occasional visits, we could now meet for regular dinners, weekend activities, and spontaneous coffee dates. Marcus was often included in these plans, creating a comfortable trio dynamic that felt like the natural extension of a close family relationship. During the summer months, we established several regular traditions: Thursday night dinners at different restaurants around the city, weekend hikes in the Columbia River Gorge, occasional concerts or festivals that all three of us enjoyed. Marcus and Chloe both loved trying new restaurants, so they often researched options and made recommendations for our Thursday night outings. They shared a more adventurous palate than I had, pushing me to try cuisines and dishes I might not have chosen on my own. These shared activities seemed healthy and normal. I was happy that my boyfriend and sister enjoyed each other's company, and I appreciated how their friendship took some of the social pressure off me. In previous relationships, I had often felt responsible for being my boyfriend's primary source of entertainment and companionship. With Marcus and Chloe both being more naturally outgoing than I was, I could relax into a more comfortable role within our group dynamic. What I did not recognize at the time was how their friendship was developing an intimacy that excluded me. They began sharing inside jokes that I did not understand, references to conversations they had during their individual hangouts that happened when I was working late or unavailable. When I would ask about these private interactions, they would offer brief explanations that technically answered my questions but left me feeling somehow outside of something important. The frequency of their one-on-one interactions increased gradually throughout the summer. Marcus would mention dropping by Chloe's apartment to help her fix something or to return a book she had lent him. Chloe would reference advice Marcus had given her about work situations or city navigation. These interactions were always presented as casual and practical, the kind of favors that friends do for each other. By late summer, I began to notice changes in both of their behavior patterns. Marcus, who had always been consistently affectionate and attentive, began to seem distracted during our time together. He would check his phone more frequently during our conversations, and sometimes seemed to be only half listening when I talked about my day or my thoughts. When I asked if everything was okay, he would assure me that work was just particularly stressful as he adjusted to his new position. Chloe, meanwhile, seemed to be thriving in Portland in ways that went beyond professional success. She had always been confident, but there was a new glow about her, an extra spring in her step that suggested something exciting was happening in her life. When I asked about this apparent happiness, she would credit her new job, her apartment, and her general satisfaction with her life choices. The shift became more pronounced as fall approached. Marcus began canceling our plans more frequently, citing work obligations or the need to help Chloe with various projects related to her apartment or her job. When we did spend time together, he seemed distant, often steering conversations toward Chloe's activities or accomplishments. He would ask detailed questions about her work projects, her social life, her thoughts on various topics, showing a level of interest in her daily experiences that felt disproportionate. During our Thursday night dinners, the dynamic began to feel different as well. Marcus and Chloe would arrive having already discussed the restaurant choice and having planned what they wanted to try.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They would share stories about things they had done together during the week, adventures and discoveries that had happened without me. While they always included me in these conversations, I increasingly felt like an audience member rather than a participant in their shared experiences. The breaking point came in October when I discovered that Marcus and Chloe had attended a concert together without telling me. I only learned about it because Chloe posted photos on Instagram, images of her and Marcus smiling together in what was clearly a concert venue. When I asked them about it separately, they both claimed it had been a last-minute decision, tickets that had become available through Marcus's coworker who could not attend. Their explanations were technically reasonable, but something about the situation felt wrong. The secrecy seemed unnecessary if this had truly been an innocent, spontaneous plan. Moreover, the band they had seen was one that I had mentioned wanting to see, making their decision to attend without me feel particularly hurtful. When I expressed my feelings about being excluded, they both apologized profusely and promised to be more thoughtful about including me in future plans. But the apologies felt hollow and their behavior did not significantly change. If anything, they seemed to become more careful about hiding their interactions rather than actually reducing their frequency. I would discover evidence of their time together through small details like inside jokes that appeared during our group conversations, or references to places they had been that they had not mentioned to me directly. The final weeks of our relationship were marked by my growing awareness that something fundamental had shifted, even though I could not identify exactly what was happening. Marcus became increasingly unavailable, both physically and emotionally. Our conversations became surface-level exchanges about practical matters rather than the deep, meaningful discussions that had characterized our relationship. Our physical intimacy decreased as well, with Marcus citing stress, fatigue, and work pressures as explanations for his lack of interest.
Meanwhile, Chloe seemed to be pulling away from me as well, though in more subtle ways. Our sister conversations became less frequent and more superficial. She stopped sharing details about her dating life, which had always been a topic of open discussion between us. When I asked direct questions about her romantic situation, she would give vague answers about being too busy with work to focus on relationships. The last normal evening I spent with Marcus was a Tuesday in late November. We had planned to cook dinner together at his apartment, something that had once been a weekly tradition but had become increasingly rare. He seemed distracted throughout the evening, checking his phone repeatedly and giving short answers to my attempts at conversation. When I suggested we plan a weekend getaway for the holidays, something we had discussed earlier in our relationship, he responded with vague comments about needing to check his work schedule and not being sure about his availability. That night, as I lay in bed next to him, I felt a profound loneliness that I had not experienced since before we met. The man sleeping beside me felt like a stranger, someone who was physically present but emotionally unreachable. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what had gone wrong and whether there was something I could do to repair whatever had broken between us. The next morning, Marcus was unusually affectionate, making me breakfast and talking enthusiastically about his work projects. This sudden shift in behavior gave me hope that perhaps his recent distance had indeed been work-related stress that was now resolving. We made plans to meet for dinner later in the week, and he kissed me goodbye with what felt like genuine warmth. That dinner never happened. On Wednesday, Marcus sent a text message canceling our plans, claiming he was not feeling well. On Thursday, he did not respond to my messages at all. Friday brought another brief text about work being overwhelming and needing some space to handle his responsibilities. By Saturday, I was genuinely worried about him and considered stopping by his apartment to check on his well-being. Before I could act on that impulse, Chloe called me with what she presented as exciting news. She had met someone, she announced, someone wonderful who she was falling for quickly. The relationship was still new, and she wanted to keep it private for now, but she was happier than she had been in years. She asked if we could postpone our planned Sunday brunch because she wanted to spend the day with this mysterious new boyfriend. At the time, I felt only happiness for my sister. After years of casual relationships and dating frustrations, she deserved to find someone special. I was curious about the identity of this new man, but I respected her desire to keep the relationship private during its early stages. I had no reason to connect her romantic news with Marcus's recent emotional distance and physical absence from my life. Sunday passed quietly, with me spending the day alone in my apartment, catching up on work projects and trying not to worry about Marcus's continued silence. I sent him one gentle text message asking if he was okay and offering support if he needed anything. He responded hours later with a brief message thanking me for my concern and promising we would talk soon. Monday brought more silence. Tuesday, the same. By Wednesday, I was oscillating between worry and anger, unsure whether Marcus was dealing with a personal crisis that required patience or whether he was simply avoiding me for reasons I could not understand. I considered reaching out to his friends or family, but realized I did not have close enough relationships with any of them to make such contact appropriate. Thursday evening, exactly 1 week after our last normal conversation, I finally decided to visit Marcus's apartment uninvited. I knew this crossed a boundary we had established about respecting each other's space, but his complete lack of communication seemed to justify more direct action. I needed to know if he was safe and to understand what was happening in our relationship. I arrived at his building around 7 in the evening, a time when I knew he would normally be home from work. I used my key to enter the building, something I had done dozens of times during our relationship. As I climbed the stairs to his floor, I rehearsed what I would say, trying to strike a balance between expressing my concern and not appearing overly dramatic or invasive. The sight that greeted me when I reached his floor changed everything I thought I knew about the previous several months. Marcus was standing in his hallway, keys in hand, clearly having just arrived home from somewhere. Next to him, close enough that their arms were touching, stood Chloe. They were engaged in intimate conversation, their heads tilted toward each other in the way that lovers do when they are sharing secrets. The shock of seeing them together froze me in place for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. Neither of them noticed me immediately, giving me a moment to observe their body language and facial expressions. There was no mistaking the romantic nature of their interaction. This was not the casual friendship I had been observing all summer. This was something deeper, more intimate, more exclusive. When Marcus finally looked up and saw me standing at the top of the stairs, his face went through a series of expressions that told the entire story. Shock at being discovered, guilt about what he had been hiding, and then something that looked almost like relief that the deception was finally over. Chloe turned to see what had caught his attention, and her own face mirrored his emotional journey. We stood there for several long seconds, the three of us frozen in a tableau that captured the complete destruction of everything I had believed about my life. Finally Marcus spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Jessica, I can explain," but I did not want to hear his explanation. Not then, not in that hallway, not with my sister standing beside him looking guilty, but not particularly surprised to see me. I turned around and walked back down the stairs, moving as quickly as I could while still maintaining some dignity. Behind me, I heard Marcus calling my name, but I did not stop or respond. The walk back to my apartment passed in a blur of shock and disbelief. My mind kept trying to process what I had seen, to find some innocent explanation for why my boyfriend and sister had been standing together in his hallway, like lovers coming home from a date. But no matter how I tried to reframe the situation, the truth was undeniable. They had been together, romantically together, and probably had been for much longer than just that evening. Back in my apartment, I sat on my couch and tried to think through what I should do next. My phone was buzzing constantly with calls and text messages from both Marcus and Chloe, but I was not ready to engage with either of them. I needed time to absorb what had happened and to decide how I wanted to respond to this betrayal. The messages I eventually read later that evening confirmed my worst fears while also revealing details I had not suspected. Marcus wrote long paragraphs about how sorry he was, how the situation had developed gradually without anyone intending for it to happen, how he had been trying to find a way to talk to me about his changing feelings but had not known how to approach such a difficult conversation. Chloe's messages followed similar themes, emphasizing her love for me as a sister while also trying to explain how her relationship with Marcus had evolved beyond her control. She wrote about not wanting to hurt me, about hoping we could all find a way to move forward that preserved our family relationship, about the genuine connection she had discovered with someone who understood her in ways she had never experienced before. Reading their messages that night, I was struck by how they both seemed to view themselves as victims of circumstance rather than active participants in a betrayal. Their language focused on things that had happened to them, feelings that had developed despite their best intentions, a situation that had become complicated beyond their ability to manage cleanly. Neither of them seemed to fully grasp the extent of their deception or the impact of their choices on me. I spent most of that night lying awake, replaying months of interactions and conversations through the new lens of understanding their secret relationship. Suddenly, everything made sense. The distracted behavior, the canceled plans, the inside jokes, the mysterious happiness that had seemed to glow from both of them. They had been falling in love with each other while pretending to care about my feelings and my relationship. The next morning brought the text message that would eventually lead to everything unraveling in ways none of us expected. At 2:47 a.m., when I was finally drifting off to sleep, my phone buzzed with a message from Chloe. 3 words that ended everything I had thought I understood about love, family, and trust. "We're together now." I stared at those 3 words until they burned into my retinas. "We're together now." The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. Not an apology, not an explanation, just a simple declaration of ownership over what had been mine. I set my phone face down on my nightstand and made a decision that surprised even me. I wasn't going to fall apart. The old Jessica would have immediately called them both, demanding answers, crying, begging to understand how this had happened. The old Jessica would have spent days analyzing every interaction, every moment, trying to figure out what she had done wrong or what she could have done differently. But sitting there in my dark bedroom at nearly 3 in the morning, I felt something different settling over me. A cold, clear anger that had nothing to do with hysteria and everything to do with self-preservation. I turned off my phone completely. Whatever Marcus and Chloe had to say to me could wait until I was ready to hear it. Right now, I needed space to think, to plan, to decide who I wanted to be in the aftermath of this betrayal. I had taken exactly 2 sick days in the past year, both for actual illness. Tomorrow, I decided, would be my third. Sleep came easier than I expected. Maybe it was emotional exhaustion, or maybe it was the relief of finally knowing the truth instead of constantly questioning my own perceptions. When I woke up at 9 the next morning, my first emotion wasn't sadness or anger, it was curiosity. Not about Marcus and Chloe, but about myself. What was I going to do now? I made coffee, called in sick to work, and sat at my small kitchen table with a notepad. At the top of the page, I wrote new life plan and then stared at the blank space below it. For 3 years, my future had included Marcus. Our conversations about marriage, children, buying a house together, traveling to Europe, growing old together. All of those dreams were gone now, and I needed to figure out what I actually wanted for myself, separate from what we had planned together. The exercise was harder than I expected. I realized that somewhere along the way, I had stopped thinking about my individual desires and had started thinking only in terms of our shared goals. When had I last considered what I wanted to do with my career that wasn't influenced by Marcus's timeline and location preferences? When had I last thought about where I wanted to live without considering his job prospects and social connections? By noon, I had filled 3 pages with random thoughts and half-formed ideas. Travel to New Zealand, take a pottery class, learn to speak Italian, apply for that senior designer position at the agency downtown, move to a different neighborhood, buy a dog. The list was chaotic and contradictory, but it was mine. These were things I wanted, not things we wanted. Around 1 in the afternoon, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Chloe standing in the hallway, shifting nervously from foot to foot. She had clearly been crying, her eyes puffy and her usually perfect makeup smeared. Part of me wanted to let her stand there indefinitely, but I was curious about what she thought she could possibly say that would make any of this better. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "What do you want, Chloe?" "I want to explain," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to apologize and try to make you understand how this happened." "How what happened?" I asked, genuinely curious about how she would frame the situation.
How you accidentally fell into bed with my boyfriend. How you accidentally had secret dates and secret conversations for months. How you accidentally sent me a text message at 3 in the morning announcing that you'd won. She flinched at the word won, as if I had slapped her. "It wasn't like that, it wasn't planned. We tried to stay away from each other, Jessica. We really did." "When?" I asked. "When exactly did you try to stay away from each other? Before or after the concert you attended together without telling me? Before or after all those private coffee dates? Before or after you moved to Portland specifically to be closer to him?" "That's not why I moved here," she protested. But her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" I stepped back from the doorway. "You know what, Chloe? I don't actually want to hear your explanation. I don't want to know the timeline of your relationship or the justifications you've created for yourselves. What I want is for you to leave. Please, Jess. You're my sister. I can't lose you over this." The use of my childhood nickname, the one only she had ever called me, almost broke my resolve. But then I remembered that this was exactly the kind of manipulation that had defined our relationship for years. Chloe pushing boundaries, crossing lines, and then using our shared history and my love for her to minimize the damage. You should have thought about that before you decided my boyfriend was something you wanted to take. I started to close the door, then stopped. Actually, I have one question. How long? What do you mean? How long have you been sleeping with Marcus? I want the truth this time. She looked down at her feet. 2 months. 2 months. I let that sink in. So all those times you stayed here, all those dinners where you sat across from me and asked about my relationship, all those conversations where you pretended to be my sister who cared about my happiness, you were lying. I do care about your happiness, she said desperately. That's why this is so hard. I never wanted to hurt you. You never wanted to get caught, I corrected.
There's a difference. After she left, I felt lighter somehow. The conversation had confirmed what I already knew about her character and motivations. There would be no dramatic reconciliation, no sisterly forgiveness, no complicated ongoing relationship where we all tried to pretend this hadn't happened. Chloe had made her choice, and now I was free to make mine. I spent the rest of that day doing research, not about relationships or healing from betrayal, but about practical matters. How to break a lease early, whether my job skills would translate to other cities, the cost of living in different places I'd always wanted to visit. I was methodical about it, the same way I approached design projects at work. Gather information, consider options, make informed decisions. By evening I had a plan, not a complete life overhaul, but a series of concrete steps that would help me build something new. The first step was getting out of Portland. The city was too small, too full of places where I might run into them. I needed distance, both geographical and emotional, to figure out who I was without the relationship that had defined my adult life. Marcus tried calling 17 times that day. I know because I finally turned my phone back on around 8 that evening and saw the missed call notifications. There were also 12 text messages, each one longer and more desperate than the last. Reading them was like watching someone drowning in their own guilt and confusion. He kept talking about how sorry he was, how much he still cared about me, how complicated the situation had become. What struck me most about his messages was how much they focused on his own emotional experience. His guilt, his confusion, his difficulty navigating the situation. There was very little acknowledgement of what he had done to me, and no apparent understanding that his feelings were not my responsibility to manage. Even in his apologies, he was making himself the center of the story. I deleted all his messages without responding. Whatever he needed to say to me, whatever closure he thought he deserved, was not my problem anymore. I had spent 3 years being considerate of his feelings, accommodating his needs, supporting his goals. That part of my life was over. The next morning, I went to work and had a conversation with my boss about the possibility of working remotely for a few months. The agency had been discussing expanding their remote work policies, and my track record of meeting deadlines and managing client relationships independently made me an ideal candidate for testing the arrangement. Within an hour, we had worked out the details. I could work from anywhere with reliable internet for the next 6 months, after which we would reevaluate the arrangement. That afternoon, I started looking at short-term rental properties in cities I'd always wanted to explore. Not permanent moves, but opportunities to experience different places while maintaining my income and professional relationships. The idea excited me in a way I hadn't felt in months. This wasn't running away from my problems, this was running toward possibilities. I found a furnished studio apartment in San Francisco, available for a 3-month rental starting the following week. The photos showed a small but charming space in the Mission District, walking distance from cafes, bookstores, and art galleries. The rent was significantly higher than what I was paying in Portland, but my savings account could handle it, especially if I was careful about other expenses. The logistics of leaving Portland moved quickly once I committed to the plan. I gave notice on my apartment, arranged for storage of my furniture, and booked a one-way ticket to San Francisco. The whole process took 4 days, during which I maintained complete radio silence with both Marcus and Chloe. They both tried various methods to reach me, including showing up at my office and asking my coworkers about my plans. I had briefed my colleagues that I was dealing with a personal situation and asked them not to share information about my whereabouts with anyone who wasn't a professional contact. My parents called twice during those 4 days. Chloe had apparently told them some version of the story that made her behavior sound like an unfortunate accident rather than a calculated betrayal. They wanted to encourage me to be understanding, to remember that family relationships were more important than romantic ones, to consider forgiveness as a path forward. I listened to their voicemails but didn't return their calls. This was not a situation where their parental mediation would be helpful or welcome. The night before my flight to San Francisco, I was packing the last of my personal items when someone knocked on my door. I assumed it was Chloe making another attempt to apologize, or possibly Marcus finally deciding to confront me in person. Instead, I found my upstairs neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, holding an envelope. "Someone dropped this off for you earlier," she said, handing me the thick cream-colored envelope. "Nice-looking young man. He seemed very concerned about making sure you got it." I thanked her and closed the door before examining the envelope. My name was written on it in Marcus's careful handwriting, but there was something else tucked inside beyond just a letter. I could feel the outline of what seemed to be photographs or documents. Part of me wanted to throw the entire thing away unopened. I had made the decision to cut both Marcus and Chloe out of my life completely, and reading whatever this was would only complicate my clean break. But curiosity won out over principle. I opened the envelope carefully, prepared to scan its contents quickly, and then dispose of them. What I found changed everything I thought I understood about the situation. The letter was shorter than I expected, just one page of Marcus's neat handwriting. But it was the photographs and documents underneath that made my hands start shaking. "Jessica," the letter began, "I know you don't want to hear from me, and I respect your decision to leave Portland, but there are things you need to know about Chloe that go beyond our relationship. Things that affect your safety and your family's financial security. I'm not telling you this to win you back, or to justify what I did. I'm telling you because despite everything, I still care about protecting you from harm." The documents were bank statements, credit reports, and what appeared to be police reports from 3 different states. All of them had Chloe's name on them, along with several aliases I had never heard her use. The photographs were surveillance images, grainy shots of Chloe entering and leaving various buildings, talking to people I didn't recognize, handling what appeared to be large amounts of cash. According to the documents, my sister had been running elaborate financial fraud schemes for at least 2 years. The bank statements showed deposits and transfers totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars, money that had moved through multiple accounts before being withdrawn or transferred to offshore accounts. The credit reports showed loans and credit lines opened in various names, most of them defaulted or written off by the lenders. The police reports were the most disturbing. Chloe was wanted for questioning in connection with identity theft rings in California, Nevada, and Washington. The victims were primarily elderly individuals who had been convinced to provide personal information through phone scams and fake investment opportunities. In at least 3 cases, the victims had lost their entire life savings. I read through everything twice, my mind struggling to reconcile this information with the sister I thought I knew. The Chloe in these documents was a sophisticated criminal who had been living a double life while pretending to be a college student and then a marketing professional. Her move to Portland hadn't been about starting a new career or stealing my boyfriend. It had been about staying ahead of law enforcement agencies that were closing in on her various schemes. The letter explained how Marcus had discovered the truth. As a structural engineer, he had been trained to notice inconsistencies and patterns that didn't make sense. Chloe's stories about her job, her finances, her background, had contained small contradictions that eventually led him to investigate. The private investigator he had hired had uncovered the full scope of her criminal activities within 2 weeks. "She approached me," Marcus wrote. "Not the other way around. She knew I was getting suspicious about her stories, and she decided to seduce me as a way to control the information I had access to. She thought if we were involved romantically, I would be less likely to expose her or more likely to help her cover her tracks. I was lonely and confused about our relationship, and I made the terrible decision to let her manipulation work." The final paragraph of the letter was the most chilling. "She's been using your parents' personal information to open credit lines and bank accounts. She's stolen almost $40,000 from them so far, and they don't know because she's been intercepting their mail and managing their online accounts. She was planning to take much more before disappearing completely. I couldn't let that happen, which is why I'm giving you this information even though it means you'll hate me even more than you already do." I sat on my couch surrounded by evidence of my sister's crimes, trying to process the magnitude of what I had discovered. The person I had grown up with, the sister I had loved and envied and resented and protected, was essentially a stranger. Everything I thought I knew about her life, her personality, her motivations had been an elaborate lie designed to provide cover for increasingly serious criminal activities. My first impulse was to call my parents immediately, to warn them about what Chloe had done and help them protect themselves from further financial damage. But I forced myself to think through the situation more carefully. If I called them with this information, they would want to know how I had obtained it. That would lead to conversations about Marcus, about the affair, about why I was leaving Portland. All of that personal drama would distract from the more urgent matter of their financial security. Instead, I decided to take the information to the police first. Let them verify the accuracy of Marcus's investigation and determine the appropriate way to contact my parents. This was bigger than family drama or romantic betrayals. This was serious criminal activity that needed to be handled by professionals. The next morning, instead of catching my flight to San Francisco, I went to the Portland Police Department with Marcus's envelope and requested to speak with someone from the Financial Crimes Division. The detective who met with me, Detective Sarah Mills, was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and kind eyes that became very serious as she reviewed the documents I had brought. "Where did you get this information?" she asked, after spending 20 minutes examining the papers and photographs. I explained the situation as simply as possible. My boyfriend had become suspicious of my sister's stories about her background and had hired a private investigator. The investigation had revealed evidence of financial crimes. My boyfriend had shared this information with me because my parents were among the victims. Detective Mills made notes as I talked, occasionally asking for clarification about dates or relationships. She seemed particularly interested in the timeline of Chloe's move to Portland and the frequency of her contact with my parents during the past year. "We're going to need to verify this information independently," she said finally. "But based on what you've shown me, your sister appears to be connected to several ongoing investigations. The best thing you can do for your parents is to encourage them to check their credit reports and bank statements immediately. Don't tell them why, just say you've heard about increased financial fraud targeting their demographic." She gave me her business card and asked me to stay in contact as the investigation progressed. She also warned me that if the allegations against Chloe were accurate, she was likely to become increasingly desperate as law enforcement closed in on her activities. Desperate criminals made unpredictable and sometimes dangerous decisions. I left the police station with a new understanding of why Marcus had shared this information with me. Despite everything that had happened between us, he had been trying to protect my family from someone who had been systematically victimizing them. His affair with Chloe had been a serious betrayal of our relationship, but it had also inadvertently exposed her criminal activities before she could cause even more damage. I called my parents from the parking lot of the police station. My mother answered on the second ring, her voice brightening when she heard it was me. "Jessica, honey, Chloe said you were upset about her new relationship. I know it's awkward, but you'll work it out. You girls always do. Mom, I need you and Dad to do something important, and I need you to do it today. Can you both check your credit reports and all your bank statements for the past year? Look for any accounts or transactions you don't recognize." "Why, what's wrong?" "I've been reading about financial fraud targeting people in your age group, and I'm worried. Just please check everything and call me back with what you find." There was a pause. "Are you sure you're not just looking for reasons to avoid dealing with the situation with Chloe? This seems like a strange time to be worried about financial fraud. Mom, please, just check your accounts and call me back. This is important." After hanging up, I sat in my car for several minutes trying to decide what to do next. My flight to San Francisco had already departed, but I could book another one. Or I could stay in Portland and deal with whatever was about to unfold with Chloe's criminal activities. Neither option felt particularly appealing, but staying felt more responsible. I checked into a hotel near the airport and spent the rest of the day researching everything I could find about financial fraud and identity theft. The more I learned, the more I understood the sophistication of what Chloe had been doing. This wasn't simple credit card theft or online scamming. She had been running coordinated operations that required significant planning, technical skills, and criminal connections. My parents called back that evening, their voices tight with stress and confusion. They had found evidence of 12 different accounts opened in their names, credit cards they had never applied for, and transactions totaling more than $40,000 that they couldn't explain. Some of the activities dated back almost 2 years. "How is this possible?" my father asked. "We're so careful with our personal information." I had to tell them the truth, not about Marcus or the affair, but about Chloe's criminal activities and the police investigation. The conversation was one of the most difficult of my life. My parents went through denial, anger, bargaining, and despair in the span of an hour. They kept insisting that there had to be some mistake, that Chloe would never do something like this, that there had to be another explanation. But as we talked through the timeline and the evidence, they began to remember small inconsistencies they had noticed but dismissed. Times when Chloe had offered to help them with online banking or bill paying. Periods when their mail delivery had been irregular. Conversations where she had asked detailed questions about their financial accounts and retirement planning. "She's our daughter," my mother said finally, her voice breaking. "How could she do this to us?" I didn't have an answer for that question. I was struggling with the same disbelief and betrayal, compounded by the knowledge that while Chloe had been stealing from our parents, she had also been systematically destroying my relationship. The person I had grown up with, the sister whose approval I had sought and whose success I had envied, had been a carefully constructed lie. Over the next week, I stayed in Portland to help my parents navigate the process of reporting the fraud and beginning to recover their stolen funds. Detective Mills connected them with specialists who helped victims of financial crimes, and slowly they began the complicated process of proving their innocence and reclaiming their financial identity. During this time, Chloe disappeared. Her apartment was abandoned, her job at the marketing firm had never actually existed, and her phone number was no longer in service. According to Detective Mills, this was typical behavior for criminals involved in sophisticated fraud operations. When they sensed law enforcement closing in, they activated pre-planned escape routes and assumed new identities in different locations. The investigation revealed that Chloe Harper was itself an assumed identity. My sister's real name was Christine Valdez, and she had been involved in financial crimes since she was 19 years old. The college transcripts she had shown our parents were falsified. The sorority photos on her social media were stolen from other people's accounts. Even her personality, the bubbly confidence I had always envied, had been a carefully crafted persona designed to gain trust and access to victims. Learning this information was like discovering that my entire childhood had been built on a foundation of lies. If Chloe wasn't who I thought she was, then what did that mean about my own identity? So much of who I understood myself to be had been defined in relation to her. I was the quiet sister, the less social one, the one who struggled with confidence because I was constantly comparing myself to someone who was actually a professional manipulator. Marcus tried to contact me several times during this week, but I wasn't ready to deal with the complexity of his role in the situation. Yes, he had ultimately done the right thing by exposing Chloe's crimes, but he had also been willing to betray our relationship based on the manipulations of someone he should have known was dangerous. The fact that he had been a victim of Chloe's schemes didn't erase the fact that he had made choices that hurt me deeply. By the end of the week, my parents had made significant progress in protecting themselves from further financial damage, and the police investigation was moving forward without needing my daily involvement. I was finally free to leave Portland and begin the process of rebuilding my own life. But San Francisco no longer appealed to me as a destination. The crisis with Chloe had changed my perspective on what I needed from this transition period. Instead of escaping to a big city where I could lose myself in anonymity and distractions, I wanted to go somewhere quiet where I could process everything that had happened and figure out who I was when I wasn't defined in relation to other people's expectations or manipulations. I canceled my San Francisco plans and instead rented a small cabin in the mountains of Colorado, 3 hours outside of Denver. The property was isolated enough to provide the solitude I craved, but close enough to civilization that I could access internet for work and supplies when necessary. The rental was available for 6 months, which felt like the right amount of time to work through the emotional and psychological aftermath of the past week. The drive from Portland to Colorado took 2 days, with an overnight stop in Salt Lake City. As I drove through the changing landscape, I felt like I was traveling not just through space, but through different versions of my identity. The Jessica who had left Portland was not the same person as the Jessica who had woken up a week ago thinking her biggest problem was a cheating boyfriend. I had learned things about my family, my judgment, and my own resilience that had fundamentally altered how I understood myself and my place in the world. The cabin in Colorado was everything I needed and nothing I expected. Perched on the side of a mountain with views that stretched for miles, it was a simple two-room structure with a stone fireplace, basic kitchen, and windows that framed the wilderness like living paintings. The silence was profound, broken only by wind through pine trees and the occasional call of mountain birds I couldn't identify. For the first week, I did nothing but sleep, eat simple meals, and sit on the small porch watching the light change across the valley below. My body was exhausted in ways I hadn't realized, as if I had been carrying tension for months without knowing it. Every morning I woke up feeling slightly more like myself and slightly less like the person who had been defined by other people's expectations and deceptions. My work routine adapted easily to the mountain schedule. I would wake at dawn, make coffee, and spend the morning hours on client projects while my mind was sharpest. The afternoon was for walks on mountain trails that challenged my city legs and cleared my head in ways I had never experienced. Evenings were for reading, journaling, and the kind of deep reflection that had been impossible in Portland. 3 weeks into my mountain retreat, Detective Mills called with updates on the investigation. Chloe, or Christine Valdez, had been apprehended in Phoenix while attempting to open new bank accounts using stolen identities. She was facing federal charges in multiple states, and the investigation had uncovered a network of accomplices that stretched across the western United States. My parents would eventually recover most of their stolen funds, though the process would take months of paperwork and legal proceedings. "She wants to speak with you," Detective Mills said near the end of our conversation. "She's asked her attorney to reach out about arranging a phone call. You're under no obligation to agree to this, but I wanted you to know she made the request." I thanked her for the information and said I would think about it. But even as I spoke the words, I knew I wouldn't be taking that call. The person who had been my sister for 24 years had never actually existed. Christine Valdez was a stranger who had used my family's love and trust as tools in her criminal enterprises. There was nothing she could say that I needed to hear. A month into my Colorado retreat, Marcus drove up the mountain to find me. I saw his truck coming up the winding dirt road from my porch and felt a complex mixture of emotions I wasn't prepared for. Part of me was angry that he had tracked me down when I had made it clear I wanted no contact, but another part was curious about what had driven him to make the 8-hour drive from Portland to this remote location. He climbed out of his truck looking tired and uncertain, clearly unsure of his welcome. We stood facing each other across 20 feet of mountain silence, two people who had shared 3 years of intimate partnership now awkward as strangers. "How did you find me?" I asked finally. "Your parents. I went to check on them to see how they were handling everything with Chloe. Your mother mentioned you were in Colorado working remotely. It took some detective work to track down the specific location. You shouldn't have come here, Marcus. We don't have anything to say to each other."
I think we do. He took a few steps closer, stopping when he saw me tense. "I know you hate me. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I need you to understand what really happened between Chloe and me. I know what happened. You had an affair with my sister while lying to me about it for months. The fact that she was manipulating you doesn't change your choices." "You're right," he said, surprising me. "I made terrible decisions and I hurt you in ways I can't take back. But there are things you don't know. Things I couldn't put in that letter because they were too complicated to explain properly." Despite my better judgment, I found myself curious. I gestured toward the 2 chairs on my porch, and we sat down facing the mountain vista that had become my daily meditation. Marcus began talking, and for the next hour I listened to a story that was even more disturbing than what I had learned from the police investigation. According to him, Chloe's seduction had been methodical and calculated from the very beginning. She had researched his background, his interests, his relationship patterns, and had crafted an approach designed to exploit his specific vulnerabilities. "She knew I was feeling uncertain about us," he said, his voice barely audible.
Not because I didn't love you, but because I was scared about the commitment we were discussing. Marriage, buying a house together, all those big steps. She identified that anxiety and used it against me. He described conversations where Chloe had subtly undermined his confidence in our relationship, pointing out small incompatibilities and suggesting that he was settling for something comfortable rather than pursuing something passionate. She had presented herself as someone who understood him in ways I never could, someone who appreciated aspects of his personality that she claimed I overlooked or undervalued. The physical relationship didn't start until much later. Marcus continued. She spent months building an emotional connection first, making me feel like she was the only person who really understood me. By the time anything physical happened, I was already emotionally involved with her in ways that felt beyond my control. I listened to his account with a mixture of compassion and detachment. I could see how Chloe, with her professional-level manipulation skills, could have orchestrated such a seduction. But I could also see the points where Marcus had made choices that prioritized his own desires over his obligations to me and to our relationship. "I don't forgive you," I said when he finished talking. "Understanding how she manipulated you doesn't erase the fact that you chose to participate in that manipulation. You chose to lie to me, to sneak around, to prioritize your relationship with her over your relationship with me." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for you to understand that losing you wasn't something I wanted. It was something that happened because I was weak and confused and manipulated by someone who was using both of us." We sat in silence for several minutes watching clouds move across the mountain peaks. Finally, Marcus asked the question I had been expecting since he arrived. "Is there any chance for us? Any possibility that we could work through this and rebuild something together?" "No," I answered without hesitation. "What we had was built on trust, and that trust is gone. Even if I could forgive what happened, I could never trust you not to be manipulated again. And I don't want to spend my life wondering if every woman who shows interest in you might be another Chloe." He nodded, accepting my answer with more grace than I had expected. "What happens now? For you, I mean, what are you going to do next?" It was a fair question, and one I had been thinking about constantly during my weeks in the mountains. "I'm not sure yet, but for the first time in years, I get to decide that for myself, without considering anyone else's needs or expectations. That feels like a gift, even though it came at a terrible cost." Marcus left that afternoon, driving back down the mountain toward a life I was no longer part of. I watched his truck disappear around the curves until I couldn't see it anymore, and felt something settle inside me that I hadn't expected. Closure, maybe, or just the final acknowledgement that a chapter of my life had truly ended. Over the remaining months of my mountain retreat, I developed new routines and discovered parts of myself that had been dormant for years. I learned to identify the birds whose calls had initially been meaningless noise. I became strong enough to hike trails that had seemed impossible when I first arrived. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college, filling canvases with the mountain landscapes that surrounded me. Most importantly, I learned to be comfortable with my own company in ways I had never imagined possible. The silence that had initially felt oppressive became peaceful. The solitude that had seemed lonely became restorative. I discovered that I actually enjoyed my own thoughts, my own sense of humor, my own ways of experiencing and interpreting the world around me. As spring approached and my 6-month rental neared its end, I made decisions about my future that surprised even me. Instead of returning to Portland or moving to another major city, I decided to stay in Colorado permanently. I had found a small town 40 minutes from my mountain retreat that had a growing community of artists and remote workers. The cost of living was reasonable, the landscape was inspiring, and the pace of life suited my emerging understanding of what I actually wanted from day-to-day existence. I bought a small house with a studio space where I could do both my client design work and my personal art projects. I adopted a rescue dog named River, who loved hiking as much as I had learned to love it. I made friends slowly and carefully, choosing relationships based on genuine compatibility rather than social convenience or family obligation. 6 months after moving to Colorado permanently, I received a letter from my parents. Chloe had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for her financial crimes. The investigation had revealed that she had stolen more than $2 million from dozens of victims over a 5-year period. My parents had recovered most of their losses, but they were still dealing with the emotional aftermath of discovering that their daughter was essentially a stranger who had used their love as a weapon against them. "We keep thinking about all the signs we missed," my mother wrote. "All the times we should have asked harder questions or insisted on meeting her friends or visiting her at school. We feel like such fools for being so easily deceived." I called them that evening, something I had been doing weekly since moving to Colorado. Our relationship had grown stronger and more honest in the aftermath of Chloe's betrayal. Without her presence to distort our family dynamics, my parents had begun to see and appreciate aspects of my personality that they had previously overlooked or undervalued. "You weren't fools," I told them. "You were loving parents who trusted your daughter. The fact that she was skilled at deception doesn't reflect poorly on your judgment or your love. But you suspected something was wrong," my father said. "Even before all this came out, you had stopped trusting her completely. How did you know when we didn't?" It was a question I had thought about extensively during my months of solitude and reflection. I think it was because I was competing with her for so many years. I was paying closer attention to the inconsistencies in her stories, because I was looking for evidence that she wasn't as perfect as she seemed. You weren't looking for flaws, because you had no reason to doubt her. A year after leaving Portland, I ran into someone who knew Marcus at a coffee shop in Denver. According to this mutual acquaintance, he had left Portland as well, taking a job with an engineering firm in Seattle. He was apparently doing well professionally, but had not entered any serious relationships since our breakup. The information didn't cause me any emotional distress, which I took as a sign of how completely I had moved on from that period of my life. By the second anniversary of what I had come to think of as my Liberation Day, I had built a life in Colorado that felt authentic and sustainable in ways my Portland life never had. My design business was thriving, with clients who appreciated both my technical skills and my artistic sensibilities. My personal art was developing in directions that surprised and excited me. I had a small circle of close friends who knew my full story and accepted me exactly as I was. Most importantly, I had learned to trust my own judgment and instincts in ways that had been impossible when I was constantly comparing myself to Chloe's manufactured perfection. I could recognize manipulation and dishonesty more quickly now, not because I had become cynical, but because I had learned to value authenticity so highly that anything false felt immediately wrong. 3 years after leaving Portland, I received an unexpected visitor. Detective Mills drove up to Colorado to deliver news about Chloe's case in person rather than over the phone. She had been attacked by another inmate and was currently in the prison hospital with serious injuries. The attack had been motivated by a dispute over money Chloe had allegedly stolen from other inmates through various commissary scams. Even in prison, she couldn't stop running cons, Detective Mills said as we sat on my porch drinking coffee. "Some people are wired in ways that make them incapable of honest relationships, even when dishonesty puts them in danger." I felt surprisingly little emotion about the news of Chloe's injury. Sadness maybe for the waste of whatever potential she might have had for a different kind of life. But no desire to visit her, no impulse to offer comfort or support, no family obligation that felt stronger than my commitment to protecting my own well-being. "Does she ever ask about me?" I found myself asking. "No," Detective Mills replied. "According to the prison staff, she's never mentioned you or your parents. It's as if you never existed in her mind once you stopped being useful to her schemes." That information was strangely comforting. It confirmed my understanding that the sister I had grown up loving was a fiction, a role Chloe had played for practical reasons rather than out of any genuine affection. Knowing that she felt no ongoing connection to me made it easier to maintain my own emotional distance from her fate. As Detective Mills prepared to leave, she asked me a question that had clearly been on her mind throughout our conversation. "Do you ever regret how everything turned out? I mean, you lost your sister, your boyfriend, your home city, your whole life plan. Some people would see that as a tragedy." I considered her question seriously, looking out at the mountain landscape that had become my daily view, thinking about the life I had built from the ashes of those losses. "I lost a lot of things," I said finally. "But most of them were illusions anyway. The sister I thought I had never existed. The boyfriend I trusted was willing to betray me when it suited his needs. The life plan I was following was built around other people's expectations rather than my own desires. Losing all of that forced me to figure out who I actually am and what I actually want. That's not a tragedy, that's liberation." After Detective Mills left, I spent the evening hiking to a favorite spot where I could watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. My dog River trotted beside me, happy to be exploring familiar trails. As we reached the overlook, I pulled out my phone and took a photograph of the view, not to share with anyone else, but to capture a moment of perfect contentment. Looking at that photograph now, I can see more than just mountains and sky. I can see the visual representation of a life I built entirely for myself, based on my own values and desires rather than anyone else's manipulation or expectations. It's a life that might look lonely to some people, but it feels full and authentic to me in ways my old life never did. The woman in that photograph is someone I like and respect, someone I trust to make good decisions and maintain healthy boundaries. She learned the hardest way possible that trust and love are not the same thing, and that family relationships require the same careful attention and mutual respect as any other significant connection. She also learned that starting over is not just possible but sometimes necessary, and that the courage to walk away from everything familiar can lead to discoveries about yourself that would never have been possible otherwise. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to refuse to accept treatment that diminishes your worth, even when that treatment comes from people you've loved your entire life. If you've ever had to rebuild your life from scratch after discovering that the people closest to you were not who you thought they were, you know how terrifying and liberating that process can be. Trust your instincts, protect your boundaries, and remember that your worth is not determined by other people's ability to see and appreciate it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.